Hello and welcome to the MS for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abby Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian, and we're going to do an episode for this month of Whaddya Wanna Know Wednesday podcast style. Honestly, the last couple of months have been a blur between my surgery and the follow-up DVT situation and launching a brand new book, You Bet Your Stretch Marks, doing the book launch party, which was last week. By the time this airs, I guess it'll be a week and a half ago. And then just birthdays. Mine was 2 days ago. And then 4 of my kids' birthdays were 11 days ago or so, 2 weeks ago, I think. Oh yeah, 2 weeks from today by the time this airs. And so I just feel like, did we even do a What Do You Want to Know Wednesday in September? I'm not sure we did, but that's okay. We're gonna dive in now. You guys always submit such good questions, and I try to pick a range so that some are, weightier, more deep and theological ones, and some are just kind of either lighthearted or kind of just answering your practical needs as much as I'm able. So this one was submitted via email from Rebecca. I don't usually say the names of the people that submit them because a lot of times it's just usernames on the internet. But this is from an email, and her name is Rebecca. And she said, hello. First of all, I wanted to say I appreciate your podcast and all the work that you do. Thank you. And then secondly, I was wondering if you might be able to do a podcast on expectations for toddlers, 2 to 3 year olds, behavior, preschool type activities, Bible learning, etc. And I told her that while I didn't think I would do an entire podcast on it, that I would happily include it in our What Do You Want to Know Wednesday questions for this week. I actually get asked about this age range and expectations a lot. It's why I have 2 toddler episodes. And if you have not listened to those yet, I believe they are numbers 8 and 9. I'll have Ezra correct that in the show notes if I have them off, but I'm almost positive because I'm always telling people about those podcasts that that's the correct number. And I do have a lot about communicating well and your expectations for small children in those 2 podcasts. So that might be helpful. But specifically, she has expectations for their behavior, preschool type activities, and Bible learning. Okay. So expectations for toddler behavior. There are some developmental things that we need to keep in mind that are going to be true for most toddlers. So for example, and I talk about this some in the other episodes, but rapid fire instructions for most toddlers are not going to be super helpful. And by the way, I'm recording this in the afternoon with little boys playing downstairs. And so as always, there might be a happy little voice or sometimes a sad little voice coming through. So I'm listening to them through the open door in my room. So if you hear giggling or playing downstairs, there you go. That's just part of life because this is how I'm getting this podcast in. Let's see. So some kids are going to be able to assimilate linear instructions and executive function commands, like do this and do this and do this in quick succession better than others. But the general rule would be that you want to make sure that you have your child's attention and that you are giving them one task at a time, because when our brains develop, one of the things that they begin to get better at as we get older and have more practice and just the prefrontal cortex becomes more developed is the ability to order things and to multitask and to, just take on more information at once without feeling overwhelmed. Now, I am a 43-year-old mom of 10 children, and I am pretty good at multitasking from years and years of practice and just necessity, but I still feel overstimulated and overwhelmed if I've got too many people asking me for things at the same time. So imagine how a 2 or 3-year-old feels. So that's one of my big things. Another thing would be that just like we as adults are affected by hormones, sleep or lack thereof, food or lack thereof, hydration or lack thereof, just the weather. We need to be careful to recognize that our small children are human beings made in the image of God who have very real needs and preferences. While we can't necessarily cater to every preference, because small children are notorious for changing their preference on a whim or depending on if they notice something and it catches their attention, suddenly that's their favorite thing or the thing they don't want. So we can't just, blow with the wind of toddler preferences, but having at least an idea of something that is going to set your toddler off, or the fact that they haven't slept well the night before, or that they've been sick recently, helps our expectations to be reasonable. So that if they are melting down regularly, or if they are shooting off like a rocket or are slower to respond, that we can show some grace there, but still work with them to practice listening well, obeying mama, being considerate to others, learning to emotionally regulate. There was this post that I ran across on social media that essentially said that if your toddler has a meltdown or throws a tantrum, that you as a parent are doing something wrong. And I have been through the toddler phase 10 times. And there have been many times when my parenting has not been perfect. In fact, I can't think of a single time where it was perfect. But there have been many times when I really did make great efforts to be prepared, to take developmental considerations into my mind, to, know my toddler's heart and preferences and cater to them. Yeah, sure. And order my actions so that they would not be, the Bible tells us not to exasperate our children. So not do something that I knew would set a child off that had a struggle with a particular thing. And yet they still had a very strong response, or they started screaming for what seemed to be no good reason. And so I want to make sure that you know that if you have a child that reacts very strongly to things, that is both developmentally normal, but also not something that you should just write off and go, well, every kid in this stage has these tantrums. Not every kid does. And I can say that from a test group of 10 kids, that some of my kids have, about 2 or 3, have had really chill 2 to 3-year-old stages and were not prone to tantrums. And some had more sensory issues or more anger issues. And you could go down a list of, like, maybe it was what they ate. Maybe it was that they were mouth breathers and they weren't getting good sleep at night. Maybe it was, you could what if your way through about 1,000,000 different scenarios. But I can just tell you that you may not always know the reason why one of your toddlers reacts a certain way and the other seems to take things in stride better. Maybe it's just temperament, but being prepared that a toddler is likely to have a strong reaction to something at some point in his life, and not freaking out and saying, like, oh no, I'm either failing as a parent, like that post kind of implied, or my toddler is broken, which is not the case either. We just need to be consistent. That's why we're called to train up a child in the way they should go, because they need us to be the ones showing them the way they should go. There's not some sort of perfect internal compass that a toddler has to follow. In fact, we're all struggling with sin nature from birth because we inherited that through Adam and the fall. So we have to be patient and forbearing without dismissing sin or dismissing habits that are going to develop into sin. So maybe that's a roundabout way of saying what to expect. But I know a lot of people are wanting me to say what you can expect in terms of like speech fluency and things like that. But I am telling you, I have had a range. All of my children speak in a way that I can understand, and they develop vocabulary at a gradual rate. But I've had one that was speaking in full descriptive sentences by 20 months. And I've had others that had much simpler vocabulary and were harder to understand for, several years longer, but they could still communicate what they needed. So I do think there are times when it's appropriate to start asking questions like, okay, my child is completely nonverbal and they're 3 years old. They're 2.5 years old. I maybe should start asking questions or getting them checked out if you have not already. And someone else is going to say, no, that should be 18 months. So it kind of requires what I'm always talking about, which is paying attention, being intentional, discernment, prayer, asking questions without freaking out. The next question was about preschool type activities. I am not a good preschool type activity mom, if I am completely honest. And what I mean by that is this. I read to my toddlers. I have them join me in life, stirring eggs, using a, safe knife to cut off the tops of strawberries, um, any kind of activities which are toddler appropriate, which would include helping dry dishes if they're not breakable, unloading dishwashers with non-breakable things, helping wipe down surfaces, or helping me to, um, pick up things and throw diapers away, and there's lots of activities that you can give kids that are age appropriate. But as far as specific preschool activities where I'm keeping them busy, particularly lining them up with craft after craft, has not been something that I have majored on. We love magnetiles. We love brain flakes. We love puzzles with the really large pieces, although you're very likely going to have to be there and help them lay those out. That's depending on the child and how coordinated they are and how much interest they have and attention span they have. You probably are going to have to be right in there with them. And kinetic sand, if you put it in like big baking trays or big Tupperware bucket type, or like, oh, what am I trying to say? Like a 9x13 type, take it somewhere casserole dish, but it's a plastic bucket, or you could do a metal bucket type thing. My kids like kinetic sand. Yes, it can make a mess for sure. And then we do lots of playing outside and jumping on the trampoline and running through the sprinkler and free play where they are playing with Legos or they are playing with dolls or figurines or stuffed animals, and they're just, playing near me, and I'm not leading an activity, but I'm, getting dinner ready or doing laundry. That's another big one is my little kids have always really enjoyed. We have laundry in drawers that are our hampers. So we pull out the drawer, and they have always loved helping me take the laundry from the drawer and putting it into the washing machine. That's a really age appropriate activity that they, for some reason, think is so fun. I think partially because they're interacting with a big machine and I'll let them press the buttons and show them which button to press. And then the water starts going and it's like, wow, that's really impressive, mom, So that would be another age appropriate responsibility, if not activity. But I just have them do life with me. I am not concerned with keeping them constantly entertained. And I think teaching small children to play independently or giving them lots of opportunity to where they are not dependent upon you to come up with their next activity is actually really great for their development. I don't just think that. There's lots of research that shows that that's true. And then it actually helps you as a mom, because if you have toddlers who depend on you for every activity, there's a lot of happy giggling going on behind me. If you have toddlers that are dependent on you for every activity, it's exhausting for you to constantly be cycling through and trying to find new ones that'll keep their attention for longer than 30 seconds. And it's not realistic in the long term. That is very difficult to maintain. So highly encourage giving your kids lots of opportunity for free play in age appropriate and safe ways. Some of which I've suggested. Bible learning. I love the complete children's illustrated Bible. It's actually a little elevated for a 2 or 3-year-old. Abby Wedgeworth has another really great series. I think the squealing is becoming less happy. You guys may not be able to hear it at all, but I'm definitely listening to it outside my door. Abby Wedgeworth has a wonderful series teaching kids a gospel-centered biblical way of addressing, like, what do we do with our hands? What do we do with our mouths? Which address a lot of questions that moms of small children have. Like, how do I teach my children appropriate ways to interact with other humans of the small or large variety? Another great resource for teaching the gospel to your small children that is not just straight scripture is the Tiny Theologians series. And Cross-Formed Kids, which is an account on Instagram, is another one that has really great theologically sound, biblically grounded teaching for small children. Okay, so enough about toddlers for now. I want to address this question from Instagram. They want to know about a response to people concerned with overpopulation. So this is an interesting one because people always cite it as a reason to not have a lot of kids, but overpopulation in the Western world is not a thing. In fact, we are well below replacement rates for the current people that we have in Europe and in America as well. So I would have to look up current statistics to make sure that I'm accurate. But the ones that I've seen recently in the last 2 years were something like 1.6, 1.56, something like that for Europe. And I believe that the replacement rate is something like 2.1, 2.2. And then the US was somewhere, I think in 2023, the US was somewhere in the 1.6 or 1.65 range as well, which just means that the parents are not being replaced by the children. And if someone is already convinced that there are too many people in the world and that the goal is to have fewer people, which I don't think is a biblical goal, there is not anywhere in God's word that says that we need fewer image bearers of God and more untouched nature. In fact, we have Genesis 1:28, which is often called the creation mandate, which is God's instructions to humans to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion over it, all of creation. So most of the cries of, oh no, overpopulation usually come from secularists who are thinking that we would be better off with nature being untouched by humanity and fewer humans in the world so that resources are untouched, essentially. Now, if you're thinking, well, okay, if maybe we are overpopulated now, so maybe it's a good thing that we're not replacing ourselves. One, biblically, no. Two, practically speaking, no. We have countries like China who has very historically, well, at least for the last 100 years or so, limited the number of children that people can have. And now they're trying to incentivize people to have more children as they're recognizing that their future workforce is dwindling and that they're going to have a very hard time filling the spots and producing the food and having the industry and replacing people who are doing creative things to advance order and joy, honestly, in humanity. So there are a lot of things that God gives us the ability to learn and to do that have made our lives more filled with sometimes just convenience, but also sometimes life-saving mechanisms, whether it's science or medicine. And so to say, okay, we just need fewer humans is also to say we need fewer people who will contribute to the world. And I don't think that that's wise. And some countries are starting to understand that it's not wise and that they're going to be worse off in the future if they do not have a turnaround in population growth in their countries. Interestingly enough, I would add that China is seeing a lot of pushback from some articles that I've read from their citizens who are refusing to have more children when in the past they were not allowed to have more children because they have now been trained to see children as a burden and as a hindrance to time spent on themselves, to money that they don't want to spend, or I guess it's not a hindrance to, well, it is a hindrance to be able to spend money on yourself. Essentially, they have been trained into seeing children as drains on their resources rather than benefits to them in society. And the government cannot seem to get their citizens out of that mindset. I, for one, am not surprised. Okay, here's another great question. Completely different direction of thought, but we'll go with this. How, they asked, do you balance doing things with older kids without it being too much for littles? I have talked about this in the past when I've talked about balancing having older kids and younger kids and what it looks like to keep that dynamic more or less in equilibrium, because it's never going to be perfect, of course. And I've talked about how much I love having a range of ages from no longer toddlers, but very small children, not even basically preschool age, but not even kindergarten age, all the way up to legal adults. In the past, when I had all younger children, we just did everything together. And the main kind of delineation between younger and older kids was bedtime. So we would all go to the park together. My 11-year-old and down would go to the park together. At that point, we probably had 7 kids. And then even when I had teenagers, if they couldn't drive, we would just do things together. And the little ones would be along for the ride and we would all help out and just make it work. Now, as my kids get older and they're responsible enough to stay home, it's not like we all went to the grocery store together like we did when I had only small children, like 7 small children, 8 and under. We all went to the grocery store together. It was just a field trip, a group activity all the time. And I don't think anybody was thinking like, oh, the younger kids are barely keeping up with the older kids, because it was just together. And I can think, for example, of a trip that I took to Dallas with 8 children. I think Shiloh was about 9 months at the time, and Ezra would, I don't know, I'd have to do the math on that, but Ezra was probably maybe 11 or 12. And well, I can do that math. Let's see. If Shiloh was a year, that would be almost 6 years ago. And Ezra's, yeah, he would have been 13. So he would have been a young teenager. And we had a blast. We went to a splash pad. We went to a fun museum. And the little kids just came along in the strollers, and I brought snacks for them. I was nursing Shiloh. We made sure we had lots of food. They were able to take naps either in a stroller or on a carrier with me. And I don't know. I loved that day. That was a core memory. That was a really fun trip, even though I was by myself with 8 children. We all worked together and we had a good time. I think you're going to hear me say a lot of "we all worked together." Um, as my kids have gotten older and they are able to drive, or they just have more, they have older kids' interests. They want to go shopping with me, or they want to go to an event. Like, we took Simon to a Mavs game last year because he's really into basketball. And so we just arranged it so that the older kids that weren't going knew that they were helping put younger kids to bed that night, which is something that happens periodically and they are totally good with. And then we'll trade off, and another set of kids will go with us, and some other kids will help out. Or if we need to hire a babysitter, or if my mom is there that day, we can make it work. So there's not a set schedule for going and doing things with older kids. It's not like it's your turn, or this is the date that we planned on, unless it's like a birthday or something like that. But we do make sure to be intentional so that we also do activities that younger kids can appreciate, that are during their waking times. And then also, I just find that my older kids, because they stay up later at this point, will gravitate toward sitting with us in the kitchen, eating ice cream and just talking to us, or we're watching funny videos together, or we watch a movie that we wouldn't watch with the little kids. And that works well too. So bedtimes are, like I said, a great way of kind of switching over into older kid mode, or just planning ahead and having a babysitter, or recognizing that if you have prepped your kids to all work together, that very likely you can still do a lot of fun activities for a wide range of ages, and the little kids can, if not tag along, be included in a very meaningful way and still be okay. Now, what's interesting, because people are going to ask me, what in the world do you do about nap times? How are you not trapped at home during nap times? I think the more kids I had, the more I was able to feel okay if my kids missed a nap or two. We still tried to stick to a rhythm of nap times in the morning when my kids were really small, and in the late afternoon or mid-afternoon if they still had a second nap. And so that did affect our schedule. But I also found that if I knew that there was going to be a day that we were out and we only got the morning nap, that we could roll with it. We might have a fussy baby for some of the time, but it would be okay. And the more I did it, the less I was concerned that one day of being off our rhythm was going to ruin the whole week, because that's usually not the case. Okay, another question. Someone wants to know about upbeat pop music options for teenage girls. Okay, so not Taylor Swift. I've done actually a whole episode on Taylor Swift, and it was quite honestly less about like being down on Taylor Swift specifically, although she is not a role model that I want for my girls or for anyone, if I'm completely honest. But she did just release an album recently, I think. And I usually don't listen to any of her music. Now, it's impossible to escape, because she is so ubiquitous that you're going to hear her in the grocery store. You're going to hear her on Instagram audios, whatever, everywhere. But I actually, interestingly enough, today had seen kind of some feedback on her lyrics and how they were really tipping over into, I think they've honestly been in the inappropriate category for a while, but were being more in your face, had more profanity, had more outright sexual content than just innuendo. Plenty of innuendo too. So I actually listened to several of her songs on the way home today because I thought, okay, what is the mm, what are we doing here, Christians? And I know this wasn't the actual question. You weren't asking about Taylor Swift, but I'm just saying I listened to her for the first time in a long time, and I came to the same conclusion, which is that it would be very hard for a mom who is wanting her teenage girls to fill their minds with whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure. If anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things, just like it says in God's word, that would qualify. Now, I will say that I'm going to give you some suggestions because the question was asked, and there may be somebody that combs through the portfolio of one of the artists that I recommend, and they're like, I cannot believe Abby recommended this person. So please understand that I am trying to recommend something in good faith for the songs that I've actually heard, because we are very picky choosy about any songs that we listen to. So, for example, there are some Ed Sheeran songs that we enjoy, but there are many that we skip. And you would have to use discernment. For example, Shape of You. We don't listen to Shape of You, but we do love his song Thinking Out Loud. And Supermarket Flowers is super sweet and sad. So it's a pick and choose type of thing. Let me think. Another one that has some songs, I haven't listened to very many of his songs, but has some songs that we enjoy, is Vance Joy. Ben Rector has some songs that we enjoy. Not all, obviously. Who else? Josiah Queen has that folksy style, but he is actually a Christian artist. Forrest Frank is a fun one, also a Christian. Matt Carney is one that we really enjoy, and almost all of his lyrics are very clean. I've listened to a lot of his songs. Sarah Bareilles, I think is how you say her last name, is an artist we enjoy a lot. But again, not every song. We listen to some Adele songs and not some other Adele songs. Who else do we do? Lauren Daigle is Christian, and I enjoy her style. She's very Adele-ish, and her lyrics are good. Those are the ones that are coming to me off the top of my head. And I'm sure I could go on because my kids do have songs that they find and introduce to me, or, a friend from their homeschool co-op recommends something and they ask if they can listen to it and we try it out. Noah Kahan has a couple of songs that we listen to that we enjoy. So I think we tend toward kind of singer-songwriter, folksy, just happy music. And that's what this question was about. I think it was asking for upbeat pop music. So there you go. Those would be some of my suggestions. Not an exhaustive list by any stretch, but also not a blanket endorsement of every artist. I feel like I have to say that over and over again, because I remember one time I said some of our favorite read alouds, and one of them was the Penderwicks. And I did give some caveats and some disclaimers, but I didn't specifically say something about the Penderwicks. And someone came into my inbox and was like, I cannot believe you recommended the Penderwicks. I'm very offended by this, that, or the other about it. And I was like, yeah, I could see how that would not be everybody's cup of tea. So I just have to give the disclaimers. I have to. Another question. Okay, so this is one I get asked all the time, and I'm actually going to do an entire episode on this. And I may have even mentioned doing another episode on this, and you're probably like, we'll get to it, Abby. But we've had a lot of great episodes that I've had lined up already. And so I have not gotten to it yet. But this question was, how do we talk to our kids about modesty? And the short answer is we talk to our kids about modesty from a biblical perspective. For example, from 1 Corinthians 12, where it talks about particular parts of your body having particular honor that we show by covering them up, essentially. And then that's the physical manifestation of it. But of course, we're talking about it as being a heart issue. I think one of the main reasons why we have people that don't show honor to certain parts of their body by giving them clothing or appropriate amounts of clothing is because of insecurity, but also because of lack of modesty of heart. So if the desire is for attention, and that could come, like I said, from arrogance, or it could come from insecurity, there's this desire to draw attention there, which is not a modest heart posture. So we talk about that as well. We talk about showing consideration for others. We talk about honoring God in everything we do, eat or drink or wear or say. And so it's a holistic approach rather than a legalistic, your shorts are, and again, I just said shorts, and some people would think that are wearing shorts at all is inappropriate. So there's going to be a scale, there's going to be discernment, there's going to be wisdom and prayer and discussion and consideration of the standards that we are interacting with, which are going to be different around the world. But ultimately, it's going to come back to a desire to honor God and love Him and love our neighbors well. And I'll go into more detail than that when I do a full podcast on it. But that's the basis for everything we talk about when it comes to modesty. Okay, another question. These are a lot of, I don't know about the modesty one being an older kid question. That could be for younger kids as well. But there were quite a few questions about older kids this time. One of them was, at what age do we allow our children to date? And I think it's important to define your terms. So it depends on what you mean by dating. If you mean at what age are we allowing our children to have people that they are interested in of the opposite sex, that they want to pursue spending some time with in a way that we're good with, which usually involves groups, or showing them some sort of special attention, I would say, 15, 16 years old, we're good with that. It's not like we're going to go, oh my goodness, you cannot have a crush on somebody. I mean, as if we could outlaw crushes anyway, or would want to, but we're going to be having consideration for our older kids' feelings to say like, oh, okay, you find this person attractive, you are drawn to something about them, tell us more about that. We don't want to shut down lines of communication or freak out just because they're not old enough to get married, or you're like, oh, well, where's it going to go? Because we do believe that the goal of getting to know someone of the opposite sex in a romantic way would be to see if they're marriageable material, not simply just to spend time, not simply just to pass time in someone else's company so that you're entertained. I don't see that anywhere in the Bible as a way of pursuing godly relationships with the opposite sex. So dating in a one-on-one, you're going to go off by yourselves together and have no accountability, is not something that we have actually done yet in our household. And we have a 19-year-old and an almost 18-year-old in our house. I dated the only other guy I dated besides my husband, Sean, starting at age 17, and we were allowed to go on dates individually. And that was an age my mom felt fine with that. I probably would concur, but we just have not had anybody that has gotten to that level of seriousness with someone that they were interested in so that they were pursuing that. We have, however, had several relationships go on for several months where we just had friend groups that were getting together. And yeah, it was acknowledged that everybody knew that these two people were talking, or, texting each other, or had a special interest in each other, and everyone was aware of that and fine with that. But we weren't encouraging them to go off alone and make it exclusive. So at the point where we have children, and our first two are boys, and we really encourage them to take the initiative in a relationship and to be the leaders there. At the point where they are interested enough in someone, especially at the ages that they are, basically 18 and 19, to think this is someone that I want to marry, that I want to spend my life with, or at the very least that I want to find out enough about to know whether I would want to marry and spend my life with them. And I'm thinking about like providing and what that would look like, and children if the Lord provided them. And you're like, whoa, Abby, that's really serious when I just asked you, when would you let them start dating? But that is how we think. We think holistically. We think from a perspective of, does this have the potential to be a lasting relationship? Not because every relationship has to last. Like I said, I was dated and was engaged to a guy before I actually married Sean, and it didn't last, and it wasn't the right person for me to marry. And I'm glad the Lord showed me that, and that he brought me to the right person, which is definitely Sean. But I was still thinking in terms of this being a commitment to this person and not something casual. So that's our perspective. And so far, that's as far as we've gotten. Our girls have not, it's not that they haven't had anybody that they've liked, but they are not to that stage yet. Della is not 15 yet. So I did just hear from someone the other day asking about how I dealt with the interest in my children, and especially with their being really young, like 13, 14 years old, and being texted all of the time by people of the opposite sex. And the way that we deal with that is very simple. My children do not have phones on which they can text with the opposite sex until they are driving age, so 16. So that kind of nips that in the bud, which is nice. Okay, this is not how I expected this podcast to end, but we had some technical difficulties with our audio on the recording, and I wanted to get this released to you. So we just took off the last question because we kept going in and out with our audio and the outro, and we are done with What Do You Want to Know Wednesday rather abruptly, much more abruptly than I expected to be. If you ever want to submit a question for WWKW podcast style, you can email me at Abby, ABBIE, at misformama, MAMA.net, or you can always submit them to my stories when I ask you on Instagram. Thank you guys for participating this week, and I will see you again next week. If you enjoyed the M is for Mama podcast, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and follow along, maybe share with friends, or even leave a review. And if you want more content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, be sure to follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.